I want you all to close your eyes and imagine a young 19-year-old boy who is driving around his neighborhood with a couple of his friends. Imagine that this occurrence is at 11 p.m., where the boys were carpooling to reach their homes safely. Now I want you to imagine red, white, and blue lights flashing. Concentrate on these lights. Now I want you to shift your focus onto the sound of a loud siren. The boys are now pulled over and are respecting the higher authorities. Two policemen approach them, and the boy in the driver's seat is reaching for his wallet to show the policeman his license and registration. Now I want you all to open your eyes. Think of what happens next. Now I want you to close your eyes once more, and I want you to imagine that these boys were African American. Everything changes because your mindset is one that is shaped by your society and the social media. According to EJI, African Americans are arrested at rates 2.5 times higher than whites. Bearing this in mind, the action of categorizing people is an involuntary reaction for many people. In one way or the other, we are all biased due to our unconscious mind. The mind is a very complex concept, so trying to understand the unconscious mind should be left to a psychoanalyst like Sigmund Freud to deal with. These immediate thoughts and interpretations of situations are engraved in one's mind. Prejudice is not a concept that is understood by nature. Rather, it is understood by nurture. Because a child's mind could be understood as a tabula rasa. This means a clean slate, according to John Locke. Although his theory has been criticized, it is important for one to understand that children's interaction with others is like a clean slate. It is in their nature to treat everyone alike, since there are no nurtured ideas revealed to them. There are two important terms one needs to understand when studying the psychology of prejudice. And those terms are unconscious bias along with implicit bias. The unconscious mind is the area of our brain that we are unaware of, and where a lot of our involuntary actions are seen to stem from. The relationship between unconscious bias and implicit bias is this idea of associating a specific stereotype towards people automatically without using our conscious mind. Quote, "The human mind must think with the aid of categories. Once formed, categories are the basis for normal prejudgment. We cannot possibly avoid this process. Orderly living depends upon it." This unavoidable process develops over time. One is not born with these characteristics, for it is a process of development over time. Humans gain their knowledge through experience, and this experience is given off by the environment that one is surrounded by. This links back to the nurture aspect of the psychology of prejudice, because our brain needs to function with the use of categorizing certain aspects. This can be seen as the biological perspective, for it explains the functioning of the human brain. Prejudice is inevitable, and with these regular installments of information for the brain to sort into categories, it will continue to work with the unconscious mind. Prejudice can be put into several different categories, and the most prominent category of prejudice in Egypt will be focused on. Inequality is usually extremely evident in countries that are developing due to the unequal distribution of the educational system amongst the boys and girls, where boys are considered a priority when it comes to education. In a country like Egypt, sexism is evident, but amongst this discrimination, there is also the discrimination of homosexuality, since it is considered to be a taboo in the Egyptian culture. Homosexuality is completely rejected, thus increasing homophobia, which in turn affects the students wishing to travel abroad for expanding their education. This is due to the closed-minded mentality that the Egyptian culture engraves in the people's mind. Quote, Another source of prejudice is the perception that gay people and the gay community represent values that are directly in conflict with one's personal value system. Values that reject the common belief of the people in Egypt are values that are considered to question the authority of God and religion. This is considered to be haram because it goes against the Egyptians' personal value system. Going back to the functioning of the brain, a category has been created solely to instantly discriminate against those who are homosexual, thus increasing homophobia and making it an action that occurs without much thought. The situation is similar with sexism solely due to the fact that women are treated as possessions. Some may say these are good intentions in order to preserve the beauty and keep the women precious, but that is still objectifying these women. Homophobia and sexism are prominent throughout the culture in Egypt due to the fact that it was a taught taboo. Then countries from abroad have created a taboo against a specific religion. Xenophobia is a phenomenon that has existed for centuries, but has seen a recent resurgence due to the socioeconomic problems stemming from immigration, terrorism, and globalization. Xenophobia is an extension of this benign form of nationalism, wherein people begin to show dislike and hatred towards people from other countries. The reason that terrorism has fueled xenophobia is due to the fact that the Islamic terrorism originating in the Middle East has been striking fear into the hearts of Europeans and Americans. Quote, like other forms of intolerance and prejudice, religious intolerance and prejudice are likely byproducts of how human brains process perceived threats, subsequent emotional reactions, worldview defense, and self-regulation ability. Looking at prejudice from the psychological perspective, one begins to notice the increasing religious intolerance and the fear of other religions. After this period of terror, it has been extremely difficult on the largely Muslim populated countries such as Egypt. The human brain is not only able to categorize the information it takes in, but the way that it processes it is interesting to notice, for it is seen as the reactions to specific threats or beliefs that are not necessarily similar to one's personal value system. This is an extremely crucial perspective for Egyptians to look into, since this discrimination somewhat shapes the person's future and could possibly put one in a position of harm. The last perspective looked at would be the psychological one, where prejudice begins to affect the productivity of the people in a country. The psychology of prejudice can be understood through the biopsychosocial dimensions. The idea that prejudice and discrimination is a learned process rather than one that a human is born with deals with the biological perspective, for it is a question of whether the process is nature or nurture. The social perspective is of what is socially correct based on culture and the value system in Egypt. Then there is the psychological perspective, which is based on the psychological well-being of people in Egypt who have to face religious intolerance and discrimination by others. All humans are guilty of being prejudiced, for it is an automatic response that is engraved in one's mind as time goes by and as people experience more. Always take a moment to think of all the perspectives of a situation in order to make sure that you beat your unconscious mind.